Today's guest is an engineer, consultant, and one of the smartest men both intellectually and emotionally I've ever met. He's the CEO of Sentient Future, a consulting company that helps people connect their passion with a clear goal. He helps people identify what it is they truly value and create a schedule that helps them live that life fully. By doing this, he has saved years from people's lives, and speaking with them for an hour, he has already saved years off mine. Being so graceful with my slow understanding of his wisdom is what makes him such a great teacher. Here's Mr. Alan Funston. All right, so Alan, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as I understand it, your primary passion right now is efficiency, right? Whether it's efficiency in getting somebody to, maybe it's efficiency in getting a company to save money and time on their operational means, or it's getting a person efficiency in sort of bridging from where they are now to where they want to be. Would you describe that as your passion, or would you like to clarify that?
Yeah, so I boil it down to one thing. The only thing I care about, period, is saving people time.
Yeah.
Now, that looks different depending on who it is, right? For an organization, you're right, that can come down to making their processes more efficient. That's fine. Yeah. For an individual, sometimes it means, and often it means, truly understanding what it is that they value, figuring out what their ideal balance looks like, how much time would they spend on X or Y, and then comparing it to how they are spending their time and seeing where that difference lies, and then helping them not only apply what they value, but also give themselves permission to do so, which is a big hurdle for a lot of people. And then that then means that they can put aside unapologetically the things they no longer care about, or that other people said they should care about, and pursue what they care about as an individual, feeling that much more fulfilled, right? So, but the only thing I really care about is saving people time.
Right. And so we had a conversation just prior to this, so I understand you and your background a little bit more. But how did you sort of get into this field and find out that this is your passion? You had started out as an engineer, is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm still an engineer, a professional engineer registered here in BC, Ontario too. Not like it matters too much. And rather than design engineering, so design and build these pieces of equipment, which I've tried but didn't love, I found again this passion for making things better, right? So whether that was a particular process within an organization, or whether it was even just something around the house, like, I don't know, why am I doing it this way? What if I did it this way, right? And I got so much joy from seeing the relief, I guess, on people's faces when they could do something differently and were able to really throw away what had been so annoying for so long. Or for someone to say, hey, I'm dealing with these problems, let's say in an organization, and I can kind of look at the business, figure out, ask some questions, and be like, your problem is there, right? Let's go address that, and then that should fix this, should fix that, and should fix this, right? And then people are like, thank you, this is really helpful, right? So like seeing that expression on people's faces is kind of what's really fulfilling.
Right. Okay. So you started out as you were studying engineering at school, right?
Yes.
And you landed a job in a firm outside of school after you completed school.
Yeah.
And I believe we had touched on this earlier, but did you I guess you had applied, everybody, when you get out of school, you don't really have much say in what kind of job you get to land into, right? But did you see hey, this is an engineering firm. Oh, it's in a field where I'm working with logistics. I didn't think that's what I wanted to go into, but you just wanted to get inside an engineering firm first?
Right. So yes, I was certainly looking for jobs as I approached graduation, and there were your various design engineering jobs, and I applied to a couple of them thinking, okay, well, I could do this, I could start here, right? But then one came across my plate, and it was talking about logistics. It was talking about using simulation software to review, analyze, and optimize some of these supply chains. And I really hadn't thought about that as a branch of engineering, and traditionally it's not really one. But this was within the context of a larger engineering company, and it was used to support engineers. And so The more I realized, or the more I thought about it, the more I realized, well, it really does leverage a lot of the skills and knowledge that I'd acquired through my engineering physics degree. And yeah, I guess at that point I was surprised that there was alignment between a job I could get and what I had really, I think, enjoyed through my youth anyways. But I just always, I never thought the two could kind of be in the same place at the same time.
Right, right. And then, so you got into this firm, and you had explained to me it was you were assisting with other companies and their desire for. Well, initially, it's to kind of to deal with the logistics of things, right? Like maybe a company would approach you and say, like, "Hey, look, I need to move." Let's say it's a mining company, right? And,
Sure.
or a
Yeah.
mining company. This company might say, like, "Hey, I need to move, X amount of ores, from this area to this area." So you would solve their logistics issues, but in doing that, you discovered a passion for sort of maximizing efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there were
Yeah.
some initial assumptions, let's say, the clients had about how they would do it, right? And certainly that option is on the table. But we and my colleagues had, we'd seen a variety of these kinds of businesses or systems before. And so we could bring other options to them, right? Well, okay, so you have option A in hand. Well, there is option B, C, and D. Some of them have some merit, right? Maybe we scratch D off the table immediately. It doesn't make sense here, right? But maybe B and C are worth looking at a little bit more in depth, or maybe some combination of what you already had in mind and some of these other options would work. And when you start doing some of the napkin math or back of the envelope calculations, you realize that it has a lot of potential, and then you see people's eyes light up because creativity, I've come to understand, is really the combination of previously separate ideas, and what that means is, like, if we bring our experience and they bring their experience, we kind of put them together, we can kind of reach a creative solution that is maybe better for everyone. And so, yeah, to see people's eyes light up when those creative solutions are offered, and to see such promise in doing it this way versus what they had assumed, like, that is extremely fulfilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really like what you said just now. Creativity is almost like the alignment of like two previously separate ideas.
Yes.
When you bring them together, you're like, oh my God, it works this way. It clicks,
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that, what you said. Okay. And how long did you work at this this engineering firm for, working in their logistics area? Like, how long did you work there for before you sort of realized, like, hey, I want to do my own thing?
Yeah, so the brief synopsis of my career path, I suppose, was, so I worked there for 3 years. I graduated in '07. For 3 years, and then the pandemic kind of took hold eventually, sort of over our clients, and a lot of my colleagues were laid off, but I was still on, but that meant I was doing more junior stuff again. And I had been kind of a senior analyst on projects by that point. So I decided, okay, well, I want to broaden my skill set. So I actually went into the manufacturing industry for about a year and a half. And managed a production team locally here. And that went really well, but it allowed me to develop my leadership skills, management skills, empathy, ability to communicate with a wide variety of people. And also at the same time apply some of my interest in efficiency, right, that this firm could also benefit from. Then things turned a corner economically, I guess, for the economy, and I was invited back to my first firm, but as a project manager. And so I was happy to return because I missed the fast pace that we had. And so that was 2010, that was 2012 or so, until about 2016. And my twins were born in 2016. Yeah. So my wife took 6 months of maternity leave. I took 6 months of paternity leave. Yeah. And then it made actually the most sense for me to take on full-time fatherhood, yeah, while my wife continued to work full-time, and I worked part-time because my career allowed it.
Yeah.
And then, so I continued to work part-time sort of with my engineering firm, but then realized, okay, well, if I'm going to try something new and novel and on my own, now is the time to build it out.
Yeah.
So that's how Sentient Future Consulting was born. And I sort of built out some of these ideas, Sentient Process Network Theory, which again, I've been kind of working on for the last 7 or 8 years. And it was really taking that passion for efficiency and seeing if I could apply it to human well-being.
Right.
So see if I could understand, okay, well, what do individuals really care about? What do they value? What behaviors do they enjoy? And then, how does that compare to how they're currently living their lives?
Right.
Can we show the divide, but then also help them give themselves permission to make change and ultimately feel better about their lives, which I argue how we feel in life is really our end game.
Right.
But we just all differ in what makes us happy.
Right. And so it almost sounds like having kids sort of kickstarted your path into sort of doing your own thing. You're like, hey, wait a minute, let me take some paternity leave, raise the kids right in their initial stages. And you're like, hey, at this time,
Yeah.
now that I have more time working by myself and working part-time, you sort of had this like idea to kind of start your own thing. I wanted to ask because and what that own thing, if it wasn't clear, you were stepping into consulting, is that right? You're stepping into having your own company, consulting other people now.
That's right. Now, what was kind of interesting is I suppose my work to that point had been consulting as well. There's a branch of engineering called consulting engineering. And so that's really what I had been in my career. And I'd really enjoyed it because I think in my youth, I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed understanding, I enjoyed listening. And so this was an opportunity to continue to consult, and both on the technical side, which I was still trained in, but then also the people side. And I noticed that, from an organizational perspective, and this is perhaps nothing new, but if we put people first, right, we kind of understand them better if we map our stakeholders, whatever you want to call it, and you compare that to perhaps the different business strategies or directions you might want to go as an organization. Well, some of those directions might look good on paper, but they're going to be met with a lot of resistance because people have been doing things a certain way, or they have certain personality types, whatever, right? So even if something looks really good on paper, right, it may not go very well, hence like a lot of change management woes you would see in corporate, because they haven't taken time to understand what the people working within the company really want, or what they'd like to be working on. And there's some marriage of the two. Right, because at the end of the day, I think it's helpful for an organization to have a strategy. But the best strategies, in my mind, that I've kind of come to appreciate and help with are the ones where they're aware, right, of what the skills and the talents of the people are, and the interests of the people are that already work with them, and which of the directions might an organization go that kind of naturally uses those individuals' skills and passions, or like latent skills that maybe haven't been applied yet, because that's where people are interested, but it's also fruitful for the organization and it's sustainable.
Has there been an example of a company that you work with, where they're trying to introduce a change, but quite a sharp change from whatever direction they were heading in before?
Right.
And you can kind of notice that there's going to be resistance, right?
Yes.
Do you have an example where that was the situation, but you were able to get them on board, or able to kind of overcome that like resistance and completely head in the direction that the company would like?
Yeah, so the one that I keep coming back to because it was perhaps the most profound was back in 2011 or so when I was working with a manufacturing company. And some of these guys who had been, it was manual labor, right? Some of these guys had been working there for 20, 25, 30 years, right? And then they had no intent in going anywhere. They were happy enough. It was a brotherhood, right? They really enjoyed the community, right? But up until a certain point, and this was part of a much larger corporation over which I didn't have control, they had a monetary incentive program where, depending on how the company did or the plant did, guys would get a bonus, right? And there was some version of that persisted, but then there was a part of their bonus that we were told was no longer going to be monetary, right? And so you can imagine on the face of that, like as a manager who had to deliver that news, as it were, that's not a position I wanted to be in. It's like, guys, sorry, these bonuses are no longer eligible for you to earn.
Right.
I'm like, oh, okay, how am I going to handle this, right? And so I thought about what I understood mattered to these guys, right? And a lot of it came down to recognition, right? Now, it's not to say that recognition is everything, and it isn't. And I found other ways to drive value and earn these guys bonuses above and beyond what they had been earning before, but just in this other new realm. But in this particular area, again, they were not going to receive monetary bonuses anymore. So I developed a non-monetary performance program, or like that measured and then celebrated, right, the successes the guys had on the floor, whether it was hitting a particular production record or more like safety first, obviously, making like the person who was most on top of their safety checks, or had the highest quality, right, for their for the shifts that they were on, and measuring that because that's naturally what I was inclined to do because it hadn't gone measured before, and then sharing that in our weekly or our monthly meetings. It's like, hey guys, across production, quality, safety, all this, right? Here's who's been the rock star this last month,
Yeah.
right? And by this much, like look how much they crushed it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it fully made up for the fact that they didn't receive monetary bonuses in that space anymore, but I think it was certainly welcome, right? That all their hard work could be measured, because again, they've been working their butts off for 25, 30 years, but it hadn't maybe been measured or recognized in that way before.
Yeah.
So that went a long way, I think, in delivering bad news, but in a way that was more kind of conducive to humanity, right? And it's like, I see you, you're putting in this effort, you're excelling, you're the rock star this month, or you have been the rock star the last couple months.
Mm-hmm.
You're on a winning streak or whatever it is. And they had casual competitions with each other and stuff like that safely. So that was really well received.
What you mentioned just now, it sort of reminds me of this battle between celebrities and, let's say, really rich businessmen who aren't celebrities, right?
Okay.
The celebrities, they're well known, they have fame, right? But they'll often say, I would trade this fame just, away. Like maybe I'll take more money, or I just wouldn't want the fame, right?
Sure.
But the rich businessmen who don't have the fame, they'll say something, they'll try to get their own fame. They might, start doing things on Instagram, on social media, and they'll want the fame. And it's almost like when you were telling me how some of these guys might have to lose on some of their monetary bonuses or payouts, but you were able to give them recognition. You were able to maybe put a measurement to their achievements at work.
Yeah.
It sort of reminds me of how if you don't have the money, maybe you want the recognition. Because on some level, no matter, even if you're a recluse who plays video games all day, there's some level of recognition that you would like in this social hierarchy,
Right. Like there's a degree to which, I hope that everyone can become self-confident, right? That there is some pride at the very least in the quality of your work, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking about it in this perspective now that you ask these questions, so I appreciate the line of questioning. Working hard, and that was the sort of the culture within this brotherhood, right? But again, I don't know if it had ever been specifically measured or recognized. So by acknowledging it, I was validating who they felt they were as people, validating their identity, right? And I think that's why it landed so well. It's because, you see yourself as a hard worker. Yeah, you're putting everything in, but nobody sees it. It's like, no, I see you, and this is obviously your hard work and is not the entirety of your identity by no means, right? But if that's a core part of of the value you think you bring as a person to society, right? Then absolutely, I think you'd want to have that seen. Mm-hmm. So I think for them, I think it was helping to validate their identity.
Right. And, earlier I had wanted to ask this question. When you then began doing your own consulting,
yeah,
when you started your own consulting firm, Were any of your clients non-organizations in the sense that your client was an individual looking for some self-improvement?
Right. So a lot of my processes were born out of my own need. Let's start with that, right? I was confused in 2016 as to where I wanted to go, and so I needed to develop tools or a process to help myself. I did that, and then found that I could generalize it well to help others, right? And so a lot of the testing and the building out of those ideas and processes were with individuals, right? I've done sort of professional mentorship, right, for UBC, right, in their engineering and business programs, undergraduate business programs, for a number of years now. And, this is something that I do, even when there's not anything in it for me, like from a money perspective, because I'm just truly passionate, again, about saving people time. So yes, it kind of starts with, understanding individuals as people, what it is that they value, how they go about, making decisions, or...
And were these like students?
Yeah,
Or-
some students,
Yeah, okay.
right? But then also some people who are mid-career, right, who are looking or facing a midlife crisis, or maybe they had been thrust into some midlife crisis because of recent layoffs.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have a bit of a runway, or what do I get into next? I have some options, but which is best for me? How do I ride the last 10, 15 years of my career out in a way that I love? So helping, your mid-career individuals out too. And then what I found a little bit later is that could be married so nicely with the consulting I had enjoyed so far in the organizational sense. Because if you come to understand what different team members within an organization want, and you can characterize the whole team as this kind of the combination of values that those individuals have, then you can start to understand, well, which directions or strategies or missions or vision, whatever, might you apply to this business group or to this organization that would be naturally supported by that team. Because it's seeing an organization for the collection of individuals that comprise it, as opposed to just this single entity.
Okay. I really want to know what it looks like when, let's say you were back at the UBC time, right?
Yeah.
And let's say a student had approached you or an individual had approached you. And let's make it a student if we can. Like, what kind of question do they come at you? Like, what's their question to you? Like, hey, Alan, what's their question?
Okay, so the questions I get most often are, what disciplines or what, so let's see, what areas of business should I, look at when I'm looking at co-op terms, right? Or I'm looking at an internship. Who should I be applying to? And it's also, it's a question of who am I going to be the most successful applying to, but then also what am I going to enjoy? What's going to help me build towards a career? What careers are out there that I might fit well into? So a lot of it's career oriented. Some of it is, I guess, adjacently related. It's, what electives do I want to take in my, third, fourth years that help me build towards, credibly entering this field. But it comes back to almost whatever question anyone asks. It always comes back to, well, what do you value, right? And so we can certainly dive into that if you'd like, but I can tell you very specifically, and it's on Sentient Process Network Theory, the bottom right-hand corner, if anybody wants to check it out. But the process is basically around identifying the activities that people have enjoyed in the past, or the people that they've enjoyed spending time with.
Yeah.
Then looking at which of the 12 sort of fundamental human behaviors, which I can list if you'd like.
And would it help if we brought up the chart right now?
Sure,
We
you
totally
can certainly bring it up. Right. So this is just the bottom right-hand corner. We can kind of touch on the other elements of it at some point if you'd like. But the basic process for identifying what it is that you value is thinking about which of the 12 fundamental behaviors you value most. And you can think about the past activities you've done and which of the behaviors within those activities are the reasons you enjoyed those activities. So the 12 fundamental behaviors here are, the first three are really around self-care: physical, mental, spiritual self-care. There are specific definitions around these, but let's just talk about the categories for the moment. Exploring, learning, organizing, deciding, solving problems, creating, teaching, connecting with others, and connecting with nature. These are context independent behaviors. So we can find ourselves doing these at work. We can find ourselves doing these with friends or with family. We can find ourselves doing these alone, right? So it really doesn't it doesn't matter where you are. You generally have the flexibility to do one of these things.
Okay.
And so if out of these 12, let's say we identify there's a subset of 8 that you really care a lot about or that you find really engaging. The other 4, you could do without.
Right.
They're a part of your life, but they don't drive you. The question then becomes, or the thought experiment is this. If you had 100 waking hours in a week, which is approximately correct, and you had no other responsibilities, right? How would you divide your time, your 100 hours, across these top 8 behaviors? Assuming you could only engage in one of these behaviors at a time, right? How much time would you feel like spending on each of these behaviors? Now, what's really interesting about that is, and I don't know if you necessarily want to go into more depth with it, but what that allows us to do is, in a way that I hadn't seen before, is transform your values, which are effectively how you feel, which is qualitative, into something quantitative, right? So it's applying weights or identifying to what degree do you care about these different behaviors. And when you understand which behaviors really drive you and which ones you care most about from that subset, you can then start asking really important questions like, well, if I'm going to make this big decision in my life, which of these decisions aligns best with the behaviors or allows me to live a life where I'm doing these behaviors more often than not? Or the other way to apply it, so that's the number 4, regret proof your long term, and the number 5, balancing your short term. That is, looking at your life maybe on a weekly basis. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you're looking at your past week. Well, what activities did I spend time on?
Yeah.
What behaviors was I really engaging in those activities? Why do I feel so lousy? Oh, because I didn't get a chance to engage in this behavior much that I really, really enjoy.
Right.
Or maybe it's connecting with others. Maybe you've been so slammed with work, you didn't get a chance to really spend time with friends. And you care about that. And again, everyone's different. What you care about is entirely unique. It's like a fingerprint, it's yours. Right? But then you can kind of look at that past week, understand perhaps why you're feeling the way you are.
Right.
And I think more proactively, look at the coming week. Geez, this week I'm going to get slammed. I'm going to be doing a ton of work, whatever, and I'm really not going to have enough time or a lot of time for these other things I enjoy. But I'm going to carve out a little bit of time at least for each thing so I can make this week feel as good as possible, right? And as sustainable as possible so I don't burn out. So that's how you actually go about quantifying qualitative values, which seems like oil and water, seems paradoxical, but does work because you're using the units of time, which we can go into if you'd like.
Right.
And then using that to make regret-proof long-term decisions, as well as balancing short-term decisions.
I just want to take a look at the regret-proof part.
Yeah. And I can explain why it's regret-proof if that helps.
So what this tells me really is, write down your most valued traits or things that you value. Write down things that you value and, maybe make a list of 12 and then identify, like, if you had 100 waking hours in a week, which ones would you be most prone to spend your time and allocate it to? Putting it down this way allows people to really see physically what it is that they want. People might have like an idea walking through life, right?
Yeah.
They might say, they might walk through life and they might go, oh, I really want to be a singer. I really want to be a singer. I really want to be a singer. But maybe they're working at a grocery store, right?
Yep.
But, they come to you and you tell them, okay, well, write down what it is that you want. They might be like, okay, I really want to take singing lessons, and by writing this down, they might be able to allocate, maybe 5 extra hours a week that they never even realized they should to getting singing lessons and kind of align them in that path that they want to take.
Well, and that's precisely it. Like I think you touched on in your first podcast episode about writing things down, making time for things, time blocking, right? Like that's a very effective behavior.
Yeah.
But a lot of the benefit of time blocking or planning out your schedule or whatever it is, and you don't have to go into a lot of depth with this if you don't want to. Some people are inclined. I'm inclined. Yeah. The benefit of scheduling your time isn't that you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it.
Okay.
Right? That's what people assume.
That's what people assume. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. The benefit of scheduling your time is not doing what you said you're going to do when you said you're going to do
Okay.
it. Okay. The benefit is to protect your time against things you don't want to do.
Ooh, okay.
Because if you have an idea of what you value and the behaviors and the activities you want to engage in,
Yeah.
and you make time for those,
Yeah.
right? Then when something comes across your desk, right? Somebody makes a request of you. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, right? And they ask for a little bit of help with something, right? And maybe they could do it themselves, or it's not super urgent, or this something like that. You can look at your calendar because you've thought through how you want to spend that time and compare the request to what your previous plan was.
Yeah.
And if the request doesn't help you feel more balanced, or you're not willing to make that particular sacrifice in that moment for that thing, sometimes you'll make a change, but let's say you're not, you can unapologetically and politely decline that request for your time.
Yeah.
Say, I'm sorry, I'm busy then, right?
Yeah.
And so you're really protecting your calendar and protecting your own well-being, frankly, against things other people either expect or ask of you that you are unwilling to sacrifice yourself for.
Yeah. So let me see if I got this right. I'd like to reiterate what you just said because I think it's very important. The importance of scheduling something in a certain time frame isn't important in the sense that, hey, look, okay, by 3:00 I got to go start this project.
Right.
The importance of it is more so you're aware that's what you want to do, and that if something else comes along, you're able to kind of place priority at that moment of, okay, so, I told myself I want to start the project at 3, and I do want to. Someone just asked me to go see a movie. What is it do I place priority on? Do I have that right, or would you like to clarify it?
That's bang on,
Yeah.
right? And so it makes the decision of accepting somebody else's request a conscious decision.
Yeah.
Because you have to compare it against what your previous plan was.
Yeah.
In a vacuum, if you have no plan for your time, if somebody asks you for help, you're a good friend, you just say yes. But I think most of us are probably experienced with times in our lives where we've said yes more than maybe we should have, and we've missed out on some of the things that we valued as people, or some of our priorities, and we've not felt great at the end of the week because we've made no time for the things we really care about. We've overextended maybe.
Yeah, what you're saying, it really resonates with me in the sense that maybe perhaps in a relationship, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We've always heard of the relationship where there's like the weak guy, right? And the girl kind of dominates the relationship. We've heard of that archetype before,
Sure.
right? What you just said really resonates me in the sense that if you're this guy, right, and you're not clear on where you want to be in life, what your goals are, right, and your girlfriend is like, hey, let's go eat, or let's go shopping, let's go do this, and because you've had no prior conception of what you want to do that day, what you want to do that year of your life, where you want to be, you might be prone to giving your time to your girlfriend. Okay, whatever you want to do, honey, let's go do it, and you might not end up very happy. You might end up as a shell of a man because you're not conscious in what you want to do with your time,
Yeah.
and someone is there just taking your time.
And I'd argue it goes both ways too, right?
Yeah.
So if taking that same example, if a woman perhaps has not thought about what she wants in her life and career or otherwise, and she has a boyfriend or a husband or a fiance or something like that, or even same-sex relationships can work this way as well. I think what ends up happening is we want to be good partners, but ironically, the more we give of ourselves, if it doesn't have healthy boundaries around it, the less sort of sustainable our long-term well-being is. And over time, we're probably showing up less well for that person we love because we're not in a good place. So if you
Yes.
truly want, and this goes for almost anything, but if you want a truly healthy relationship, or let's say you care about a particular community or group, burning yourself out in the first 30 days, 60 days, whatever, to help individuals or that community as best you can. But to the point where you have to take a break for months on end because all of what you needed had gone ignored for so long, that doesn't actually serve the community as well. You'd be far better off, you'd create more value for others sustainably if you are in parallel making sure that you're good, right? That you're taken care of. That's the self-care piece that kind of shows up in those first three behaviors. Different people value those to different degrees or need different amounts of those, and that's fine. But yeah, if you really want to show up in a relationship, it's finding that balance between what you need and setting some healthy boundaries, and of course figuring out what your partner or what other people need too, and having those good open conversations about, okay, let's do your thing now. I'm going to do my thing later, and then we've got some float, week to week, where sometimes it's more you, sometimes it's more me, so sometimes it's just us, or sometimes it's us with extended family because they have needs, or whatever it is, or kids. So
right. That, you really have to take care of yourself first, and I think most people aren't aware of that. And I think the processes that you describe can really help people understand that, where, hey, look, maybe figure out yourself first, figure out what makes you happy, figure out what makes you full. So then when you show up to these, whether it's a social event or it's work or a relationship, you're able to show up full. You're able to show up ready, ready to help.
Yeah, I think that's very much it. And the other thing I would argue is, when you're clear on what your ideal balance is, or in how much time you would spend on these behaviors and activities that makes you feel fulfilled, then you can have, again, that open conversation. Hey, honey, I've been spending a ton of time at work this week. I'm really out of balance, right? You can see, like, this is so far from what I want, or from my balance. I just need a little bit of time to decompress, or I need to go out with my friends, Thursday or whatever it is. Right? Or you can see that in your partner too. It's like, hey, I know you really care about these things and you've really been slammed lately. I've got the kids, I've got all the house stuff, right? Whatever it is. Hopefully people are doing their fair share of everything, but just give it all to me. You go play golf, or you go get your nails done, or you go spend time with friends, whatever it is. And so I think, being open and honest with ourselves and with the people that we love allows us to, I think, establish those boundaries, justify those boundaries if we have to, but then also help protect the well-being of the people around us. Because sometimes, you've probably seen it in yourself and others, people get slammed or they get burnt out, and they don't necessarily see that slippery slope that they're on, right? And so you can kind of intervene to help people protect their own well-being.
That happens to me like quite often. It's only sort of like nowadays when I've realized, hey, look, I'm starting to burn both ends of the candle. Let me bring it back a bit. Like, what is it that I want? Maybe I do need to relax a little bit. And I'm thinking to myself, like, no, I need to take more calls at work or something like that when I can actually slow it down. Because I don't think anybody's demanding that of me except perhaps myself. But I wanted to ask, like, I don't think that you got into this field purely by working and realize, like, do you think that some of these traits of you, like, wanting to help people and seeing the relationships between people and what they want, like, was any of that, like, cultivated by your upbringing in any way? Like, did you have any siblings, perhaps?
So I have a younger brother, and we have a great relationship. He's about 3 years younger. We're very different people, but we really enjoy it. I love learning from him because there's so much he can teach me in realms I'm not educated, right? So that's really encouraging. I think we were kind of brought up to, I don't know if it's anything special, but, treat other people well, that kind of thing. Genuinely wanted to try to do it. If we were mean, we were called out on it, and as I try to do with my kids, but I think these things take repetition. So, I think, as I mentioned, kind of in 2016 or so, 2017, a lot of these methods were born out of my own individual need. And the backstory there, if you're interested, I'll try to keep it relatively brief, was that kind of in early 2018, I looked back on my life and estimated that, 55,203 hours, or roughly 6.3 years of my time, I hadn't had scheduled for what it is that I valued. Now that's a fraction of my life because I was 30 something at the time, and not perhaps a big deal, but for me it represented like, well, I've had these opportunities, but I've not made the most of them. I feel guilty. I feel regret.
Yeah.
How do I make up for the 6.3 years of wasted time? I can't go back in time. What do I do? So the question then became, okay, well, what if I could define what I value now and live, and at the very least stop the bleeding, right? And stop contributing to this regretted time that I have in my own life. But then start using some of these methods for defining what people want or, in their own lives and what they value. Start using those methods to help other people, and then any amount of time that they say those methods help them or save them, what if I thought about that as chipping away at my 6.3 year deficit, right? And if I could get from negative 6.3 up to 0, then I could say that I'd lived a fully intentional life, right? That I'd regretted some time, but I'd made up for it, right? So I was actually able to, through helping others in those early days, get within a year back up to 0. So people had told me that our time together was worth months or years of their time because they've been able to reclaim it for what they wanted instead of what other people told them they should want.
Yeah.
And then I got to 0. I'm like, fantastic, this is a great milestone. The next question was, well, where do I go from here? Because I went from negative 6.3 to 0. Can I go positive? And what would be the symbolism perhaps of going positive?
Yeah.
So the way I started to think about that philosophically was, okay, if I'm going to live roughly 80 years, I'm just throwing this out there, heaven forbid something happens before then. And if we look at time as our universal currency, right, because we spend it, we save it, that kind of thing, then I'm spending 80 years worth of this currency over my life, okay? Well, what if I were to try to create a net benefit to society? If I'm spending 80 years, is there a chance I could save at least 80 years in other people's lives for what it is that they value, just better alignment to what they value? And what would the significance of that be? And I think I kind of came to the idea that, if I'm giving my life expectancy or the equivalent of that in time to other people per what they report, then I can say that I'd lived a fully given life, right? And that I'd contributed a net benefit to society, that when I pass away, hopefully somewhere 80, maybe above, I don't know, right? That I'd left the world a little better than I'd found it, kind of thing, right? Or at least not taken from society and misused this time. So within the next year after that, I was actually able to crack 80 years into the positive and lived a fully given life. And so what's strange is that was at age 32 or 33 or something like that. 35. What's strange about that is I could now die happy. I've contributed, I believe, a net positive to society. People have told me, I think, from an individual perspective now, clients that have said that I've saved them a collective 450 years of time. And
how do they measure that? So
great question.
And so what you're saying is, in 2018 you realize, hey, I think I've wasted a few of my good years or a few years of my life, and you calculated that to be about 6 point something, right? And so you realize like, hey, I want to make it up. I want to either make up the time in my life, and then if I have achieved that, I want to now make it up for other people in life. So other people are saving time in their life, right? You're giving back. You're giving back not just money, you're giving back time. Time is money, you're giving back time. In a way, you're giving back money. But
well, they can do whatever they want with the time, right? They can spend it with family or they can go make money, whatever.
Exactly. How does your clients report to you, hey, Alan, you've saved me 7 years this year? How do they report that to you?
So when we go through the exercise of defining what it is that they value and figuring out what their balance is, right? We then compare their ideal balance and behaviors with how they have been spending their time, right? And it's not always this ideal against, how they have been spending their time, but often it's, for a couple of weeks after, right? Or a month after, they try to implement it. They unapologetically carve out the parts of their life that they actually don't really care about, whether it's, it's more YouTube or more social media. And it's not like there's anything wrong with social media, just like necessarily. But like they start carving out things and replacing them with stuff that they truly care about. And so they're able to measure the difference between how much time they're now spending on what it is they value versus how much time they were spending on things that they value before they had really defined it.
Right.
And so that ends up being, a certain amount of time saved per week or per month, and then we scale that up
Right.
To their life expectancy. So it's an estimate,
Right,
but
right.
it's driven by the evidence of I've made these changes sustainably in my life,
Right.
and I've given myself permission to make these changes.
Right.
And so we build up the estimate that way.
Oh, I see. Would that be sort of the request of more like individual clients if they had mentioned like, hey, I'm spending some time on, social media or YouTube?
Yeah.
Or would that also be the request of like an organization coming at you? Hey, our employees are slacking. Like,
So it works for the same reasons, but with different outcomes, right?
see.
So when I do work with organizations, it almost always requires these one-on-one conversations with the people within that team, right, or the stakeholders, or people that represent a stakeholder group, let's say.
Yeah.
And so first and foremost, that process helps them globally within their life or holistically within their life anyways. It's not just at work, right? Because they come to fundamentally understand who they are as unique individuals better, right? And they can apply that on a lot of these same tools. But how that then benefits the organization is the organization can then kind of look at, it's in everyone's best interest, right, to be transparent with these, because if I'm transparent with what I want as, then, an organization that truly cares and knows that it's in their sustainable best interest, right, to have people lead balanced lives while working with them, they're going to want to try to, give me work that I love more often than not. That is, needed work, necessary work, right? So, so it's born out of, an organization maybe looking at its people and realizing a couple of them, self-reported, what have you, are really out of balance. These people love these things, but this particular role we have them in right now is really far away from, what they're looking for in their life, or some of the behaviors they really enjoy. Somebody really likes organizing, right? But they don't love problem solving per se. It's like, okay, well, we can take you away from some of the problem solving elements, and there's a ton we need to organize. So organizations can look at the difference between the behaviors people are yearning for, and maybe the role descriptions that they have, and make shifts, make changes, or make kind of like employment change plans, right, as you do on like an annual basis with your manager, but then start to achieve that balance better. And a lot of the times it's just having the right people in the right roles for what they're both good at but also interested in. Right.
As you were saying that, I was just thinking that I was just wondering, like, and I think your work is God's work. Like, people need to realize that. People need to be more efficient with their time and what their priorities are. But as you were saying that, I was just thinking to myself, like, has anybody ever like hired you, or a company hires you, right? And you start talking to some of their employees, right? And their employees are like, wait a minute, I got to get out of this job. There's something I value more than this, And then the company, the CEO's like, Alan, I hired you to be more efficient. How come, my employees are leaving?
So that's a great point, because the short answer is yes. Sometimes, right, employees come to understand that this particular role for them is not sustainable. And more specific, we reach very specific conclusions about why. It's like, you need more of this. This role gives you none of that, right? But what's interesting about that, especially as some more progressive minded organizations, is that there was going to come a point when that person left anyways. And there was going to come a point when, a tipping point, as it were, or that person burns out, or that person just leaves, no, like, zero notice, no two weeks, whatever, right? And that can cause a ton of problems for the organization. It was a matter of time before that separation occurred, right? Or the person's quality of life dipped as well because they're not passionate about this. So it's actually in the organization's best interest to identify where those differences or discrepancies.
Yeah, because by making the team more lean, you're trimming out the fat. Some of these workers, like you're saying, perhaps they're already quit. They already checked out.
Right.
Their mind is somewhere else. By trimming the fat, you're allowing the organization to be more efficient. You're allowing that person to find maybe what it is their interest really lies in life, and they're able to go pursue it. It's sort of like the best of both worlds.
Well, I wouldn't frame it as trimming the fat necessarily, right? I mean, I think some consultants certainly get a bad reputation for cost-cutting measures where they're just slashing whole teams or whatever, and people get stuck holding the bag of like 2 or 3 persons worth of work. That is absolutely the furthest.
That's not what I was trying to say. Yeah,
I know, the furthest thing from what I want, right? But it's identifying the differences, right, between what people want and what they're currently doing, and then seeing if there are opportunities to transform that person's role into something that is better aligned, because then you reduce turnover, right? That person still benefits the company greatly in a new or different role. Maybe it's maybe it's sideways, maybe it's a promotion, right? You're retaining a lot of that tribal knowledge, right? The people understand the business processes, that kind of thing. You don't have to retrain new individuals. So a lot of the time it's about shifting people's roles within an organization and not necessarily suggesting that they outright leave. Obviously, at times, individuals might decide that's the best thing for them, but it's better to identify that early for the company to do its best to modify someone's responsibilities so that they can, at least in the interim, be a bit more sustainable. And maybe there is a longer term plan to move on to something, but it's kind of a collective effort where it's like, hey, if we're gonna take this off your plate, we're gonna add this instead because we know you enjoy it a lot more, right? And we know that maybe long term you're after this, and there's not a place in our company to offer you this, but you can stay in this role for as long as you like because we still really need this done.
Yeah.
Let us help you find somewhere new in exchange for you helping us give some time to find the next the next person, right? So it can be a very open, collaborative conversation where people's well-being is truly thought of. Because if you think about like the Glassdoor websites and such, it's like people will sing the praises of companies or managers or leaders who have genuinely cared, right? And this is a very specific method to go about caring. And I think that's what hadn't existed up until now.
Yeah.
Was we care about people, but what does that mean? How do we do it?
Yeah.
This is how you actually do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of what I felt was missing.
Do you find that, because you work with companies, right? And with my experiences of companies, as more of a worker, is that they're not as fluid as perhaps like, do you find that you run into some like fluidity issues in terms of perhaps focusing on the strengths of some of their workers and getting them the responsibilities that they would shine at? Like, how much obstacles do you sort of encounter in your day-to-day job? And what are some of the skills that you use to kind of overcome those obstacles? Or maybe you don't find there's obstacles with fluidity in these operations.
So you raise a really good point, because I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be practical, it has to be actionable, right? So there are sometimes limits in the short term about the changes that an organization can make. Some some companies are very slow to change, or not generally accepting or embracing of change.
Yeah.
I think it's a valuable conversation to have anyways, because if an individual within that team expresses that they need this kind of balance and they're really not getting it, combination of outside of their careers and within their careers, and the organization wants to make change, right, or seeks to acknowledge, right, the balance that these individuals want, but their hands are somewhat tied in their ability to do that on a near-term basis.
Right.
It's like, okay, we can make that happen probably in the next 6 months, but it's not something we can immediately change. Sometimes that can be the reassurance that people need. And don't get me wrong, organizations need to stand behind what they say. Like, they need to show that they're actually making progress towards it. But in the same way that I mentioned earlier, sometimes people just value validation of their identity, right? Even like the simple fact that an organization cares to understand who its people are. right? Or that we as care about, to understand who others are. It's all person to person. That can go a long way, right? And then I think it's reasonable for employees to understand that maybe there aren't near-term changes that can be made, but at least their ideal balance has been acknowledged. At least someone has shown that they cared. And maybe there are some medium-term efforts that we can work towards. And if that's good enough, then great. At least the employees know that change is on the way, and it needs to really be on the way. But if that's too long to wait, at least the company has sort of acknowledged them, and they may still self-select out to a different company because they've got a better fit elsewhere. But again, that's long-term in the company's best interest. So the reality may be the same, but simply acknowledging, I think, the identity of the people that you work with is a great way of showing that you care and counts for something. So, but it will be met with the reality of, can a company make changes to the roles?
Yeah.
And you hope that they can. In some ways they can, but I think it's worth exploring anyways.
Right. Okay. Alan, I think we've discussed what it is. I think we've discussed, your background and leading up into this, and sort of where your passion lies. Do you want to discuss the process a little bit more here? The process that you outlined.
Sure. Maybe zoom out.
Yeah.
Maybe we can leave it at this Zoom level and not necessarily step through big areas of it, because I think there's a lot that we could go into.
Yeah.
But I can speak to a high level about the various sections, and then people can kind of read it about those sections if they want to kind of dive deeper.
And of course the link to that will be in the bottom of this video. And at the end, we want to hear you shout out your socials and everywhere they can find your work. But please let us know how this would work here.
Right. So I mean, I can briefly expand on kind of these perspectives that I think are useful for us to have and why it matters. And then maybe what some of the different sections, what topics some of the different sections touch on that might be of interest to your viewers.
Yeah, I think earlier you had explained this to me and it had made a lot of sense. So there's three sections, right? The sentient section, the process, and the network.
Yes.
First, can you explain how these relate to each other?
Sure, yeah. So I think the easiest way to think about it is zooming out, right? So the idea is, this is sentient process network theory, and it's the idea that we are a network of processes that are sentient. Now let me just briefly explain. So we as humans are sentient, and what it means is that we have the capacity for pleasure, pain, and suffering.
Yeah.
It means that what we value is subjective, right? Not things in life are not objectively valuable. So I mean, the old expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, is exactly this, right? You may value something that I don't, and I may value something that you don't. Neither of us are wrong, right? It is just a unique perspective, right? So the top third of the work is really around understanding who we are as individuals. It's really around self-awareness.
Yeah, guys, and we're looking at the first row here, sentient. If you take a look, we're looking at this first row here.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, if people want to dive deeper, they can, but the concept is much like a feedback loop. We have the capacity to sense what's going on around us, or who we are, self and context. We have the capacity to interpret what we've sensed, right? Emotionally or with reason, logic. And both are important, they're critical. And then we have the capacity to respond to that and what sense we've made of the things around us, how we're going to decide to act, and then ultimately the actions we take. So the first row, the sentient row here, the sort of first column, if you take a look, the sense, you're saying these are sort of what is coming at us, or how we sense things. Almost inputs, right?
Inputs, yeah.
Yeah, so the self sort of sub-column there, it's like, well, what do we know about our own body? What do we know about our mind? What do we believe about our soul? And I mean that in a practical sense, kind of like the network of selves over time. and context, right? Who is around us? What is around us? What resources are around us? What landscape are we in? What that kind of thing.
I see. Okay.
What culture are we a part of that would affect perhaps our decisions or actions?
I see. Okay. And then in the sense, interpret is sort of like how we interpret these inputs, right? As the name suggests.
Correct. It's like, well, what is happening measurably? Who's doing what, right? That's kind of very maybe specific. But then emotion, what does that mean? How do I feel about that? How do other people feel about this? What emotions are coming up in me as I observe?
Right.
Right. So the self-awareness piece, the interpretation of what we are sensing, and then responding. Okay, well, that means, okay, how am I going to make a decision? What decision am I making? I am going to look at these factors. I'm going to make a decision in this way, and then ultimately acting, whether that's giving further thought to something, or reaching out, or speaking out, or going somewhere else. Right? It's like, okay, well, I need groceries. I'm going to go, to the store.
I'm hungry. I need to go get some food. So sort of like in this first row here, there's the sense, right? This is yourself. And so with the first column here, sense, there's like the self and the context. Self, would you say, is classified by like maybe your thoughts?
So I break it down just figuratively here into mind, body, and soul, or body, mind, and soul, and just because it's a familiar framework for people. But the body, I think, is very clear. The mind is more so your ideas, your memories, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so sorry. So then, like, mind, body, and soul. And body, it could be like, let's say you're lying on a bed of grass. You're touching grass. You're getting a sense of what grass feels like, right? And then context is like sort of the people around you. Maybe your tribe, your village. There's people giving you information.
Yep.
You're getting a sense of things. And the second column, interpret. How are these things making you feel, right? And would you say this emotion and reason is sort of like emotion versus like logic, feeling versus thinking of interpreting these inputs?
Yeah, and I wouldn't. I think so often, right, logic and emotion are put at odds with one another. But I'd argue in many ways, just psychologically, they're integrated, right? Okay. We can't extract one or the other. We would not want to be, nor can we be, fully rational nor fully emotional. So I think it's in honoring both.
It's not versus each other, but these are two sort of separate ways you can interpret things.
Yeah.
They're not against each other, certainly not. But you can interpret things emotionally, and you can also interpret things, because one's how is it making you feel, and the other one is what kind of like information you're getting, you're processing out of it.
What you understand to be true.
Right. And then sort of the third column here, respond, is, okay, well, now that you've got this input and, you've processed it with your emotions, or you processed it, thinking about it, what kind of decisions are you making out of it, and what kind of actions perhaps are you taking out of it? Precisely. What I wanted to ask is this fourth dimension, or this fourth column, dimensions. I don't think I had heard. How would you explain that one?
Yeah. So I have an interesting take perhaps on time and space. I'm not advocating for anything kind of particularly strange here, but just another way of looking at it. So I think there's two ways to look at time. There's the conventional sense of, okay, well, what time is it now? How much time will something take? How much time in the future, that kind of thing. But then there's also a way of looking at time that I quite like, and that's looking at it as the universal currency that we have. Mm-hmm. So we spend time, we save time, we can waste time. Yeah. Right. So looking at it as a currency. What's really nice about that particular perspective on time is that it is, how do I say? Is that the reason I call it our universal currency is because time can buy anything. Yeah. Right. Whereas money cannot. Yeah. Right. Time can buy friendships. Time can buy self-awareness. Time can buy money can't. Yeah. Right. Money is kind of this poor substitute for time, as it were. Yeah. So, but you can use time to buy anything. So that's another, I think, a useful perspective for that. And we obviously exist kind of within that dimension, as it were. Fourth dimension, I think, is sometimes looked at as time. Right,
I see. So okay. And now I see why dimensions sort of placed under sentient. And once again, that sort of represents like each individual, right? And then we have this like second row here. Process. Yeah. Would you like to
elaborate on it a little bit? Yeah. So coming from a background in management science, right, I there are some really good tools for understanding, okay, do you have too much of some input? Do you have too much of some output? Do you have some weird behavior, some weird processes going on?
Yeah.
Do you have a growth in the inventory of something? Is there some inventory depleting? Is that a problem?
Yeah.
Do you have a capacity for how much of something you can have? Are we reaching that limit?
Yeah.
Things like, what's the purpose of some process? And again, I'm just speaking more globally about what are different elements of a general process, right? What is the purpose of the process? Why does it exist? What is the what operation is it performing? How is it transforming its inputs to its outputs? Right? These are natural parts. What biases does it have, right? Is this, like, think of some machine, right? No, obviously we're not machines, but think of some machine, maybe the tolerances are ever so slightly off, and so, you're filling a bag of stuff, and more often than not, it's just a little bit underfilled compared to the set point. The bias is towards underfilling versus overfilling, right? So just knowing into those biases. Performance, how do you measure the performance? So, at what rate are things happening? How strong are things? How consistent are things?
Right.
And then what state is something currently in, right? Is it currently working? Is it currently idle? Is it currently broken? Is it currently in the middle of being fixed? So kind of understanding that. So taking that general process, those general process categories, and thinking about, okay, if we were to consider ourselves as hyper-complex processes, which I think we are, we're taking inputs, we're expressing outputs. What's weird is the stuff that happens internally, right? The emotional piece, where we're not rational creatures, or not fully rational. So when you receive some input, some information, you're likely to act differently than when I receive that same piece of information, right? So that's what makes us different, is kind of the internal processing piece. But thinking about how might we define the boundary, the inputs, the inventory, the outputs, the purpose, the operation, the bias, the performance, and the state of ourselves, right? Of our body, which is fairly clear cut, our mind, maybe our thoughts were our memories, our soul. The thing I want to touch on briefly around soul is different people have different beliefs around this, but I think a really practical way of looking at that is thinking about the network, the social network we have with ourselves at different points in time. So think about 99 other yous, ages 1 to 100. Think about like being all in that room with those people. That's a useful way to think about a soul, right? Where are the decisions you making, are the decisions that you're making today, approved by the 37 future yous that are going to have to live with it, right? Or the the younger you that would want to see your today you succeed, kind of thing. So I think that's a useful way of thinking about sort of the social. About the soul is kind of like a social network with ourselves.
Okay.
But and you can certainly, or the audience can kind of step through these and ask questions about why these fit so well. But then also, you'll notice just below that there's a context, couple of rows to the process as well, and that's starting to think about these same things. But what about other people? Right. And what about inanimate objects? Right? Because inanimate objects like this table, it's a process too. It's receiving some input, it's receiving forces, it's receiving a strike, it's receiving, and it's far simpler perhaps than something living like us. But nevertheless, it's from like a physics standpoint, like there's a lot you could say about it. Some of which is relevant, some isn't.
And would you say an output for a table is its support of whatever you put on there?
Sure, right? Or even the light reflecting off of it or something like that, right? Like it has properties like it's this, it's covered in glass, it's reflective. So like, these are observations you can make about inanimate objects. Now, the point isn't necessarily that all of this information is necessarily relevant to what you're thinking about now. We hardly ever think about tables, right? They just are and they work, whatever. But the point of this whole work was, can we come to understand ourselves and each other and the world around us, inanimate objects, that kind of stuff, and how all that information is connected and how we interact, so that when you observe particular symptoms in your life or within an organization, that you can start understanding how those pieces are connected, and maybe only 3 out of these 100, right, are relevant to the conversation. But knowing how that's all connected is useful, because then you can find a solution to the problem that fixes those 3 things at once, rather than fixing one thing and breaking the other 2, or breaking more, right? So the point was, how is this all connected?
And does that sort of take us into the third row, network?
It does.
Yeah.
It's a great segue, right? So the point is, remember, if we kind of think about ourselves as a network of processes whom are sentient, right, who have the capacity for pleasure, pain, and suffering, who value things subjectively, right, then thinking about how we're connected is really, really useful. When I behave a certain way, it affects other people. It affects inanimate objects. I could push the table, right? Or when I speak, I could elicit negative emotions. Like I could, if I were mean to you, you would feel sad. Like at the very least, you would feel the emotion of sadness.
Yeah, when I send a text to my friend group, one might perceive it different than the other.
Exactly, right? And so what was really interesting to me is understanding, okay, well, if we're all connected through our interactions, which I think is easily understood, how do we then use that information? Right. Now, there were two prior works from academia that I found quite compelling. The first was Dr. Robert Plutchik's Psychoevolutionary Theory of Emotion, which is at the top center of the work. If you want to scroll up, it's in that emotion section right there. Scroll up.
Okay.
Yeah. So just that flower with the different emotions and the dyads, which are combinations of those emotions. That was a really useful. It's not perfect, but it's a really useful and practical way of thinking about emotions.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a color scheme here. But then there was another work by Dr. Martin Seligman around cross-culturally valued behaviors or virtues, which it kind of takes us down to that bottom third row that we're kind of talking about. And what I attempted to do, was unite the two. So as I understood it, more somewhat generally, but when we engage in certain behaviors, right, that seem to be cross-culturally valued, what emotions are generally evoked in those that observe that behavior, right? So if if we are outwardly loving or kind or brave, right, what emotions does that tend to evoke in other people? And there are opposites of that too. If I express hatred or malice or what's the
maybe we could go into one of them because I
Sure.
hear you. Which one do you think would best illustrate an example here?
Yeah, let's do bravery. Bravery is an interesting one.
Right.
So can you zoom in on bravery? I've got some smaller text there to kind of help us look at the combinations of colors, right? So the way that I look at bravery, so the actor in these particular network diagrams, if you want to call them that, the actor is at the bottom in the center, okay? And the observers are largely near the top.
Wait, the actors as in the ones that see.
So let's say you put yourself in the perspective of the person at the bottom. Okay, and then the people at the top are the ones that are observing your behavior.
Yeah, or receiving your actions.
Or receiving your actions, exactly. And then to the side, maybe those are similar with the colleagues or resources, whatever, that are kind of a part of your behavior. So when you are brave, right, the emotion that I'd argue we exhibit when we're being brave is dominance, right? There is trust, which is green, and there's anger, which is red. Now, anger does not mean rage. It just means a willingness to walk towards our problems. Fear is walking away from the problems, right? So trust and anger is, I'm confident that in approaching this problem, that I can resolve it or that I can make change.
In that moment, are you the one exhibiting the trust in yourself?
You're exhibiting trust in yourself, and not necessarily trust that the outcome will be positive, because I think sometimes when we're being brave, we're not quite sure of how things will go, but trust that we are able to deal with what happens.
Okay.
Right? And so our ability to pivot and change. So anyways, so if we're if we have this feeling of dominance of, I'm walking towards this problem, I'm going to do my best to solve it, I'm being brave, right? That can be interpreted in a few different ways. And some of the ways that I would argue are, positive, some of them are negative, kind of depending on the situation. So if we look at those top three, here are some examples. So the left one, alarm, right? So you're being brave, perhaps out of nowhere, right? That surprises someone. Surprise is that light blue.
Yeah.
Right? Surprise and so the dark green is actually fear.
Okay.
So if you are surprising someone and they are kind of afraid, right? Then that is alarming. Holy, this guy's being brave out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like we really have a lot of resources. How does he think he can take on us? Whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of like some sentiment that you could evoke. Submission is fear with trust. Like they're being brave and they're gonna crush us. We're in trouble. Right.
Okay.
And then there's also despair too, which is fear with disgust, I think, and that is. I am, like, who does he think he is? Like, you can't do this to me type thing, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, these top three in particular are kind of meant to be the opponents, or meant to represent the opponents in this situation where you're being brave.
Yeah.
But notice there are a couple on the bottom left and right here too, and these are perhaps the people on behalf, the people who you are being brave for.
Yeah.
Okay, so they can look at this very differently too. As opposed to the opponents, these are almost allies, right? So there's optimism, right? People can feel joy, which is the yellow, with anticipation, which is orange, right? So optimism, he's fighting for us. I think we can win, right? I have confidence, and this could be really positive for us.
Yeah.
And then there's also pride, right? Of joy with anger, and that is, wow, look at him go. I'm so glad to be his friend. I'm so glad he's on our side.
Yeah.
So these are some different feelings that can, I think is a good example, right, of ways that our behaviors can, not always, but can be received more often than not, by both those we might act against versus those who we might act for.
Yeah.
And then we can obviously go into other examples, but I think one is enough.
Yeah, and I think these are great examples. If you guys have ever thought about, how taking like a certain action, if you ever just want to see like how an emotion that you display, and what the other people's reactions to that might be, and not just that, like how their reactions are broken down into emotions too. So I really like the dual color perhaps you place. Hey, alarm is a symbol of fear and what was the...
Fear and surprise.
Fear and surprise, and how submission is fear and trust. If you guys ever want to break down like how a certain emotion...
Yeah.
Or how a virtue is broken down to emotions, take a look at this chart. It's really interesting how in detail it goes into.
So the cheat sheet, as it were, right, for the different colors of emotion, that's what's at the top center.
Yeah.
And the combination of two core emotions are called dyads. And so the combinations of those are up at the top. So all of the colors match, all of the, and I've tried to use the same language everywhere. So you can cross-reference if you like.
Yeah.
But I think the value of looking at this, which was kind of a byproduct, I didn't intend for it to come out this way, at least at first until I saw its potential, but was if you combine kind of a useful theory of emotion with a useful theory of behaviors, you can come to a pretty compelling model of empathy, right? When I behave this way, this is how others are likely to feel. Or other people are feeling this way. What did I do to make them feel that way? Oh, I must have really slighted them, or oh, I must have said something offensive. That gives us the power to go apologize, if we're reflecting on the past.
Yeah.
But it also gives us the power to think ahead, and it's like, okay, well, I want to earn this person's trust. What are some behaviors I could engage in? And assuming this is not manipulative, like it's just comes out of genuine wanting to develop a relationship. What are some behaviors I could engage in that would likely increase the trust this person has for me? What evidence can I give to them that they would trust me?
Yeah, and sometimes like I'll do something, right, just out of pure what it is that I want to do, out of pure authenticity, out of pure genuineness of whatever it is I want to express, and I'll see a reaction in somebody, and I'm almost surprised. I see like pure submission. Let's say, or I see pure pride on their face, and I'm like, oh, you like that, eh? Oh, you like that? You can really take a look at this chart and realize, like, what it is that made them appreciate you. If you ever want to think about it on a more qualitative scale.
Yeah, that's right. And you are certainly not the only person. I feel like everyone probably has acted in some way that has surprised others, or others have reacted to us in ways we didn't anticipate. Yeah. And that's part of this, us being sentient, us having had unique experiences, us having had past traumas, whatever it is, and that may be meaning that we're going to respond uniquely to a behavior of ours that, or of somebody else's, that they don't normally see. So, therein lies, as we had talked about earlier, I think the value of really understanding people's background, where they come from, what they value, how they want to spend their time, what their dreams or aspirations are. Asking those open-ended questions in a genuine way and really trying to develop a relationship, I think then allows us to communicate what we're saying in a way that's going to be received in the right way, in a way that will be interpreted as we hoped it would be interpreted. Because I, for one, and I think others as well, like sometimes we've offended others unintentionally and didn't see it coming, and maybe it's irreparable. We try our best to apologize, but it's better to kind of avoid those if possible, ask more questions, be more curious about those people. And then we know, okay, how are they going to best receive this information? And that kind of goes into the age-old wisdom of knowing your audience,
right,
for any kind of communication.
Right. Well, Alan, I think I've received more knowledge about just like what it is that we feel and what it is that maybe like drives us on a day-to-day level, and how it is that we get closer to that today than I've ever received in my life. And I've had a lot of moments where you've said something and it filled me with energy and it filled me with
Thank you.
like goosebumps. Literally, I have goosebumps right now. I think you can see it. I just love talking with you. Alan, where can they find you?
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. So my handle on just about every social media platform is Sentient Future. So SENTIENT Future. Instagram and LinkedIn. You can find me under my name, Alan Funston, for any sort of corporate work. Yeah. I'm kind of looking forward to answering any questions people might have. Yeah. But I truly hope, right, whether we're ever in touch or not, right, that some of these ideas do at least initiate question asking within the lives of your audience or our continued lives. Just like, well, what is it I really want, and who really am I, and can I unapologetically be that and set appropriate boundaries and be who I want to be for other people in a way that they see it and they understand it. Yeah. I think it just improves, hopefully, communication. But then kind of when that awareness, right, of each other and ourselves is more clear, I think it just really allows us to collaborate and do so much better as a species than we have been.
Yeah. I think everybody can benefit from listening to this, and and I get what you're saying. Even if they don't reach out, and you guys reach out to Alan, I'm sure he'll respond. As much as he can. Like, even if you don't reach out to allow this to kind of spawn a catalyst in you, But I'm not here to prescribe anything. At least that's how it made me feel. Alan, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.